Hello everyone, my name is Max. Well, my middle name is Max, but I'm adopting the name Max for these interviews with No Bail, Just Jail. So, like many of you, I'm just someone that listens or watches this YouTube channel because it interests me for a variety of reasons. The first is that I'm interested in the law, and as a lawyer, that's of course something that is quite useful to be interested in the law. But I actually practice for a company in an in-house position as a kind of corporate lawyer, and so I don't really get to deal with the sort of law that No Bail, Just Jail has been exposed to, being that of criminal law. It's a very interesting area, and I've really enjoyed listening to his perspective. A few things about me. I understand that No Bail, Just Jail has given you a brief introduction. So I'm based in Victoria. I'm relatively young. I'm 28 years old, and I've been a solicitor for about 5 years. Something to note is that the information that I provide to No Bail, Just Jail on this, in this video and in any future videos or interviews that I do with No Bail, Just Jail, it's not professional legal advice. So I've read through some of the questions that have been sent in, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. And as far as I'm concerned, my information is probably accurate, but it is just information. It's not advice, and you shouldn't act or not act based on the information that's provided to you by me or by anyone else on the internet, to be honest with you. You should always rely on a lawyer to give you tailored advice specific to your situation. Now, that out of the way, let's have a look at one of the questions that has come up when I've been conversing back and forth with No Bail, Just Jail. And just briefly, it is actually meant to be an interview. I was meant to ring him today, but I completely forgot, and it was my fault. And so to kind of make up for that, I've decided to quickly do this video for No Bail, Just Jail, to get things rolling. And in future, I certainly intend on doing an interview with him. So let's look at the first question here. Why is it that when legal aid is used, it's not always the best quality representation? Do barristers of considerable experience get assigned to the most serious charges only? So, for example, does a person on murder get a much more experienced barrister than, someone on common assault? Well, in short, yes. That's certainly true, that the most experienced barristers do get assigned to people that are facing more serious offences. Most legal aid lawyers technically are quite excellent. Entrance is highly competitive for any job in the legal profession, but it is particularly competitive to the legal aid graduate program. Only a dozen candidates are selected per state, and the overwhelming come from very good law schools. They're very competent people. The issue is time. They don't have enough time, and it is a very serious issue. Legal aid in each state may receive $80 to $90 million in funding, and it's woefully insufficient. In terms of barristers, many top barristers will want to take a high-profile murder trial even if it's free. If I were a barrister starting out, I would be very happy to take on a murder case, and I consider myself quite skilled, and I would happily take that on for nothing and work for free. Many barristers would take on a murder case if they could and do it for free. Some do this kind of free work for altruistic reasons, some for self-interest, sometimes both. I certainly do pro bono work, and it's out of a sense of self-interest in wanting to develop my career and my skill, and also sometimes because it may be in a field, if I volunteer at a local legal clinic, which I still do, I may undertake this particular work because it's outside the field that I normally practice in. I enjoy helping people in criminal and family law because it's an interesting area that's got nothing to do with corporate law, which is the area in which I currently practice. Now, not all barristers are brilliant, but very few are of poor quality. In order to become a barrister, not only do you need to be an admitted solicitor and have been admitted to practice, but you need to undertake something which is called reading reading the law for a period of 6 to 9 months. And so you read with a barrister, and just to get into that program, you need to undertake an entrance examination, which is very difficult. So barristers tend to be good, but the problem is that you don't typically get assigned a barrister to represent you in the matters that most people face. Most people in Australian jails at some time are going to be released. Thankfully, serious crime like murder is quite rare in Australia. Obviously we hear about it, but there are 25 million people, 26 million people in Australia, and, a couple of hundred murders a year, if that. So the people facing charges that are going to see them locked up for life, as in never to be released, or locked up for, say, more than a decade, they're relatively rare. Most people in our jails are going to walk out, and most people in our jails are going to walk out within the next 5 years. So with the limited funds that are presented, for assigning solicitors and for assigning barristers, it is natural that the more serious the charge, the more money and resources one receives. And people can have a look at the case of Dietrich and the Queen, which is, involved a man called Hugo Rich, formerly known as Hugo Dietrich, which was 3 decades ago, but it's still good law. And that sort of essentially stated in one section of it that in a serious criminal trial, the trial must be adjourned until competent legal representation is provided to a client unable to afford it on their own. Otherwise, if the trial were to proceed, it may be unfair and a serious miscarriage of justice. So that's the principle. That's the reason why people tend to get better legal representation the worse crime they're accused of committing, because they're facing more time in jail. The stakes are higher, and there's limited money to go around. I think, building on my answer, I think that this access to justice question is something it's incredibly important. We talk about, when I say we, I mean society is often discussing the inequality. I think that the inequality of accessing justice is something that is, it's something to be seriously concerned about. It's not something that I, as an officer of the Supreme Court of Victoria, I'm not happy about this. I'm not. It causes me moments of disquiet, of discomfort to know that there are people out there that may need the expertise of a lawyer and not be able to afford it. And it's something that's not particularly talked about. And I think that, sometimes the tabloid media do us no favours in their, hyperbole and their dramatisation of crime and the sometimes inflamed way in which they discuss law and order. I think that people being accused of crime and having access to justice, it's not something that's at the forefront of the mind of the general public. And that is something that the general public should be more concerned with, because as I think many of the listeners know, and I think as No Bail Just Jail knows, we're all one step away from ending up in front of a magistrate, or even worse, in front of a county or Supreme Court judge. And so I do not think that we've got equal access to justice in our society. Obviously, the best justice comes to those who can most afford it. And it is something to seriously consider and something to think about. Unfortunately, I do think that, due to the lack of public awareness, there is very, very little political will to increase legal aid funding to the point that everyone who is placed under arrest has access to a solicitor. I find it very interesting, to be honest with you, that in a country such as America, which has many faults, as we all know, but one thing that can be said is that it is more or less a constitutional right that everyone that is placed under arrest is required to have legal representation if they so demand it. And look, people are still entitled to legal representation, but I do not think that there's a de facto right to a publicly funded lawyer for everyone that's charged with a crime here in Australia. But I believe it to be the case in the United States. And maybe that's something that we should consider doing here in Australia. But due to the cost and I think the lack of political will, I think that that's something that is very unlikely. And I hope in a small way that by participating in a discussion with Nobel Just Jail and coming onto these podcasts, I can help just that little bit. And it's in that spirit that I intend to participate in an ongoing basis for as long as Nobel Just Jail wants me. Thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful week.